Imagine endless expanses where the wind plays with the grass and the sky seems limitless. We will travel to such places today, where human civilization was still finding its way. The world we will explore was completely different from our own, but it was here that forces capable of changing the course of history were born. What if the most powerful army in history arose not from palaces and fortresses, but from the wild steppes, where survival depended on fortitude and the ability to read the wind? This question, like a quiet whisper from the past, leads us to the origins of great change. Long before the name of Genghis Khan became known from east to west, the Eurasian steppes were home to many peoples. These lands, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube, were the cradle of nomadic civilizations. People here lived in harmony with nature, their lives shaped by the changing seasons and the movement of their herds. They were skilled horsemen, warriors, and herders. Theirs was a world of constant movement, where a home could be established anywhere where the grass was thick enough for grazing. These nomadic tribes, despite their disunity, possessed a unique culture and traditions. They valued freedom, loyalty, and strength. Their society was built on clan ties and tribal customs. It was in this environment that the skills that would later enable them to create one of the largest empires ever to exist were developed. The steppes weren't just a habitat, they were a teacher. They taught patience, endurance, and adaptability. Life in such conditions required constant vigilance and the ability to make quick decisions. Every day was a test of endurance, and only the most resilient could survive and thrive. It was in this harsh yet uniquely beautiful environment, amidst endless grass and beneath the soaring sky, that the journey of a man whose name will forever remain in the annals of history began. A journey that began modestly, but led to unprecedented conquests and transformations. We will begin our journey from the beginning, from a time when the empire did not yet exist, but its foundations had already been laid. In the vast steppes of Eurasia, where the wind blew through the tall grasses, a legend was born. It is the story of a man whose name became synonymous with power and change, Genghis Khan. But before he became the great Khan, he was just a boy whose childhood was full of trials. The future conqueror was born around 1162 or so into the family of the noble Mongol leader Yesugei. His real name was Temujin, meaning blacksmith or iron. This name was possibly given to him in honor of an enemy his father defeated shortly before his birth. Temujin's mother, Holun, was a wise and strong woman who greatly influenced his upbringing. Temujin's childhood was far from serene. When he was only 9 years old, his father, Yesugei, was poisoned by enemies. This event became a turning point in the young Temujin's life. His family, left without protection and support, found themselves in an extremely vulnerable position. They were forced to abandon their former home and live in poverty, constantly fearing attack. At that time, Mongol society was fragmented into numerous tribes and clans, often at odds with one another. Life was harsh, and survival depended on strength, cunning, and the loyalty of allies. Temujin learned from a young age to fight for his place in the sun. He learned the bitterness of betrayal and the value of true friendship. One of the key moments in Temujin's development was his kidnapping by the hostile Taichuid clan. He managed to escape, but this experience forged his character and strengthened his resolve. He understood that strength and unity were essential for survival and prosperity. His wife, Borte, played a key role in his fate. She was the daughter of another respected chieftain, and their marriage was arranged. One day, while Temujin and his men were on campaign, his camp was attacked by a Merkit clan, and Borte was kidnapped. This presented a serious challenge for Temujin. He turned to his old friend and ally Jamuka and his father, Togrul Khan of the Kerid tribe, for help. Together, they were able to repel the attack and recapture Borte. This joint operation strengthened his ties with his allies and demonstrated his leadership qualities. During this period, Temujin began to gather loyal followers around him. He was attracted not only to warriors, but also to those possessing intelligence and loyalty. He learned from his elders, absorbing their experience in military affairs and governance. Jamuka, who was initially his friend and comrade, and later became his chief rival, played a key role in his development. They fought together in battle, but over time their paths diverged when it became clear that they were each vying for leadership in the steppe. By the early 12th century, Temujin was strong enough to challenge other major leaders. He began methodically uniting the disparate Mongol and Turkic tribes under his rule. His methods were varied. He used both military force and diplomacy, offering alliances and promising protection. He was known for his fairness toward his supporters and ruthlessness toward his enemies. His ability to build strong, loyal troops played a key role in his success. He valued not only noble birth, but also the personal qualities of his warriors, bravery, loyalty, and skill. He implemented a new organizational system in which loyalty was directed primarily to himself, not to family ties. By 1205, after a series of decisive battles and political maneuvers, Temujin had subjugated most of the Mongol tribes. At a great assembly known as the Kurultai, held on the banks of the Onum River, he was proclaimed Great Khan, receiving the name Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler or Lord of the world. This was more than just a title, but a symbol of the birth of a new power that would soon change the course of world history. It was the dawn of a new era, a world that had previously known only disparate nomadic tribes now stood on the threshold of the emergence of a unified, powerful state born in the heart of the Eurasian steppes. Genghis Khan, having endured the hardships of his childhood and youth, became a unifier, a leader whose will and vision determined the fate of millions. After Genghis Khan was proclaimed Great Khan, he faced the task of not only holding on to his conquests, but also establishing order in the lives of his subjects. The steppes, where everyone was accustomed to a certain freedom and their own customs, demanded a new system. It was then that the great code of laws, known as the Yasa, was born. It was not simply a collection of rules, but rather a code designed to establish order, justice, and unity among disparate tribes. The Yasa regulated many aspects of life, from military service and the distribution of spoils to family relations and behavior in public. Its provisions were aimed at strengthening the Khan's authority, promoting discipline, and preventing civil strife. The foundation of Genghis Khan's power was his army. It was organized on a fundamentally new basis. Instead of the traditional division by clans and tribes, the army was divided into decimal units, tens, hundreds, thousands, and tumens, each with its own commanders appointed by the Khan himself. This structure ensured strict discipline and efficient command. The soldiers' loyalty was directed not to their tribal leader, but to Genghis Khan and his officers. This was a revolutionary step that made it possible to create a unified, well-coordinated military mechanism. The army placed great emphasis on training and preparation. Warriors underwent rigorous training, perfecting their skills with the bow, sword, and mounted combat. Mongol archers were among the most skilled in the world. They could shoot from horseback, hitting targets with great accuracy. Mongol tactics included swift raids, feints, encirclements, and the use of psychological pressure on the enemy. They skillfully exploited the advantages of their mobility and familiarity with the steppe landscape. Everyday life in the army was harsh but fair. Loot was divided according to established rules, eliminating robbery and discontent. Every soldier knew his place and role. Discipline was ironclad. Disobeying orders or showing cowardice was met with severe punishment. However, for bravery and loyalty, soldiers received well-deserved rewards and respect. This created an atmosphere of mutual responsibility and dedication to the common cause. Having built a powerful army and established internal order, Genghis Khan was ready for expansion. His sights turned beyond his native steppes. His first targets were neighboring peoples and states with whom the Mongols had long-standing contacts, both peaceful and hostile. His initial campaigns were aimed at subduing the remaining rebellious tribes and strengthening the borders. One of the first significant clashes was the war with the Tungut state of Xia. The Tunguts, who lived in northwest China, had long been under Mongol influence. Genghis Khan launched several campaigns against them, beginning around 1201. These campaigns were not only military operations, but also a kind of training exercise for the young Mongol army, a means of acquiring resources and demonstrating power. During these campaigns, the Mongols learned to besiege cities, overcome new types of fortifications, and conduct military operations against more settled peoples. An important part of Genghis Khan's strategy was establishing control over trade routes. The Eurasian steppes were crossed by ancient caravan routes, and control over them meant not only revenue from duties, but also the ability to influence the economies of neighboring states. Expanding his domain opened access to new markets and resources, which was vital for a growing power. The first years after the unification of the tribes were a time of consolidating power and preparing for larger-scale conquests. Genghis Khan took his time, carefully considering every step. He understood that long-term success required not only military superiority, but also wise governance based on clear laws and fair treatment of his subjects. The Yasa became the foundation on which the future empire was built, and the well-organized army became its iron fist. These two elements, law and force, became the driving force behind Mongol expansion, which would soon change the map of the world. After Genghis Khan firmly established his power over the Mongol tribes and launched his first successful campaigns, his sights turned south to the rich lands of the Khwarezm Shah state. This was a powerful kingdom spread across vast territories of Central Asia, with a developed culture, large cities, and significant military potential. The ruler of Khwarezm was Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, an ambitious and sometimes reckless ruler whose actions ultimately led to his death and the collapse of the entire state. The conflict was sparked by a tragic incident that occurred around 1221. A Mongol embassy sent by Genghis Khan to establish trade relations and exchanges was treacherously attacked in the city of Otrar. The city was under the control of one of the Khwarezm Shah's governors named Inalchuk. On Inalchuk's orders, perhaps fearing the strengthening of Mongol influence or acting on his own initiative, all members of the embassy were killed and their goods plundered. This act of aggression, which violated all laws of hospitality and international norms, was the last straw for Genghis Khan. He saw it not just as an insult, but as a direct declaration of war. Having assembled a vast army, estimated at between 100 to 200,000 warriors, Genghis Khan began preparations for a grand campaign. The Mongol army was highly organized and disciplined. Every warrior knew his place and role. A distinctive feature of the Mongol army was its mobility. Light cavalry, capable of covering vast distances, and their ability to maneuver in open terrain made them a formidable adversary. The Mongols were also renowned for their siegecraft skills, adopted from the Chinese and other sedentary peoples, and used a variety of siege engines, such as catapults and battering rams. In 1221, Mongol troops crossed the Sir Darya River and invaded the territory of the Khwarezm Shah state. Genghis Khan divided his army into several corps, each pursuing its own objectives. One detachment, under the command of General Jebe and Subideh, moved west to distract enemy forces and scout routes. Genghis Khan himself, with the main army, headed south toward the largest cities of Khwarezm. The first major target was the city of Otrar, where the embassy was attacked. After a tense siege lasting several months, the city was taken. Inalchuk was captured and, according to some sources, subjected to severe punishment, which may have included having molten silver poured into his eyes as a symbol of retribution for the stolen goods. The Mongols then moved on to Bukhara, one of the most important cultural and commercial centers of Central Asia. The capture of Bukhara in 1221 was a symbolic event. The city was well fortified, but Mongol tactics, which included both direct assaults and cunning maneuvers, proved effective. The city's inhabitants, as in other conquered places, faced the harsh realities of Mongol conquest. Many were killed, others taken into slavery, and the city itself was destroyed. However, unlike the complete destruction sometimes attributed to the Mongols, cities were often rebuilt to serve as new administrative centers and sources of revenue for the empire. The next target was Samarkand, the capital of the Khwarezm Shah Empire. Instead of uniting his forces and mounting a decisive response, Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II raced across the country, attempting to organize a defense, but his actions were disjointed and ineffective. He abandoned Samarkand and headed south to the Caspian Sea, where he eventually died in poverty and obscurity on an island. The siege of Samarkand began in 1221. The Mongols employed all their military knowledge and cunning. They built embankments to scale the walls, used siege engines to destroy fortifications, and even used prisoners as human shields. After several months of siege, the city fell. The Mongols, as in Bukhara, carried out a brutal purge, but the city itself, like many others, was not completely destroyed. It was sacked, but later repopulated and became an important element of the Mongol Empire. The campaign against the Khwarezm Shah state was not simply a military invasion, but also a demonstration of new power, capable of crushing even powerful kingdoms. Genghis Khan's strategy relied not only on military superiority, but also on psychological pressure. Rumors of the Mongols' cruelty and ruthlessness spread faster than their army, often causing panic and demoralization among his enemies. The consequences of the fall of the Khwarezm Shah Empire were enormous. This state, which had been a center of trade and culture for centuries, was virtually destroyed. Millions of people died or were forced to flee their homes. Vast territories of Central Asia fell under Mongol rule. This campaign opened the way for the Mongol Empire to expand westward, to Persia, Transcaucasia, and beyond, to the borders of Europe. For the inhabitants of the lands where the Mongol campaigns took place, this was a time of great upheaval. Cities once teeming with life, artisans, merchants, and farmers all faced destruction and uncertainty. However, it's important to understand that Mongol conquest didn't always mean total annihilation. After the initial destruction, the Mongols sought to establish their authority, collect taxes, and maintain order. They were pragmatists, and destroyed cities brought them no benefit. Therefore, after a period of chaos, reconstruction often began, albeit under new leadership. The fall of the Khwarezm Shah Empire demonstrated to the world the power and determination of Genghis Khan. It was not just a conquest, but the beginning of a new era in which the Mongol Empire became the dominant force across the vast expanses of Eurasia. This event became a harbinger of further conquests and the profound changes the Mongols would bring to the history of many peoples. After the triumphant conclusion of the campaign against the Khwarezm Shahs, Genghis Khan and his warriors turned their attention north to the vast lands of northern China. Here, the powerful Jin dynasty ruled, founded by the Jurchens, a people who came from the Amur River Valley. In the early 12th century, around 1121, the Jurchens overthrew their predecessors, the Khitans, and founded an empire that stretched from Manchuria to the Huai River. The Jin capital was Zhongdu, later known as Beijing, a magnificent center of power and culture. The Jin dynasty posed a formidable adversary. Its army was well organized, and its lands possessed significant resources. The Jurchens, a people accustomed to harsh conditions, were skilled warriors. They also successfully adopted many of the achievements of Chinese civilization, including the bureaucratic system and agriculture. Northern China under Jin rule was a region with developed cities, bustling markets, and a thriving agricultural sector. The lives of ordinary people, peasants and artisans, generally followed centuries-old traditions. Peasants cultivated the fields, growing rice and wheat, while artisans in the cities created silk, ceramics, and metalwork. Trade flourished, linking the various corners of the empire. The Mongols began their invasions of the Jin lands in the first half of the 13th century, around 1215. These campaigns were long and arduous. The Jurchens put up fierce resistance, utilizing their fortresses and well-trained troops. The Mongols, for their part, employed their renowned tactics, based on mobility, rapid maneuvers, and psychological pressure. They skillfully utilized siege equipment, often capturing it from defeated peoples, and adapted it to their own needs. One of the key moments in the conquest of northern China was the capture of the capital, Zhongzhou, in 1213. This city, the heart of the Jin Empire, was captured and largely destroyed after a lengthy siege. The loss of the capital was a heavy blow to the Jin dynasty. The Mongols did not stop there. They continued their campaigns, gradually weakening enemy resistance. It's important to understand that the Mongol conquests were not a uniform process. They often included periods of intense military action, followed by periods of establishing Mongol rule. After conquest, the Mongols sought to establish governance, collect taxes, and maintain order. They were pragmatic rulers. Destroyed cities and devastated lands brought them no benefit. Therefore, after a period of destruction, reconstruction often began, albeit under new leadership. By 1234, the Jin dynasty had finally fallen. Its lands were annexed by the vast Mongol Empire. The conquest of northern China was of enormous significance. It not only expanded Genghis Khan's dominion, but also gave the Mongols access to the resources, technology, and experience of one of the most advanced states of the time. Chinese artisans, engineers, and scientists became part of the Mongol army and administration, contributing their knowledge and skills to further conquests. This was a crucial step toward creating the largest empire in human history. The Mongols thus not only destroyed, but also transformed, incorporating the achievements of conquered peoples into their own system. After successful campaigns in northern China, Mongol commanders turned their gaze west. The empire, which had expanded under the rule of Genghis Khan, sought to strengthen its borders and secure trade routes. Meanwhile, to the west, in the Eurasian steppes, existed peoples and states whose destinies would soon become intertwined with Mongol expansion. One of the most significant events of this period was the clash between the Mongol armies and the Russian principalities. This wasn't the first encounter, but this particular campaign had far-reaching consequences. In 1223, the Mongol commanders Sube'etei and Jebe, leading a reconnaissance detachment, set out deep into the Polevsian steppes. Their mission was to explore the territory and assess the strength of a potential enemy. The Polevsian Khans, facing the Mongol threat, turned to their neighbors, the Russian princes, for help. They sent envoys pleading for support, citing their long-standing ties and shared danger. The Russian princes, though divided among themselves, understood that such a threat could not be ignored. A congress was convened, at which it was decided to provide assistance to the Polovtsians. The princes assembled an army, which, according to various estimates, numbered several thousand men. Among them were warriors from various principalities: Kiev, Galicia-Volyn, Chernigov, and others. At the head of this united force stood princes, including Mstislav the Bold, Mstislav of Kiev, and Daniel of Galicia. It was a significant military formation, but it lacked a unified command and a clear strategy. The Mongols, with their high discipline and experienced leadership, foresaw this course of events. Sube'etei and Jebe, aware of the approaching Russian forces, decided to lure them into a trap. They began to retreat, skillfully luring the Russian army further south, into the steppe. The Mongols employed scorched earth tactics, depriving the enemy of the opportunity to replenish food and forage supplies. The battle took place on the Kalka River, whose name has become synonymous with tragic defeat for the Russian principalities. It occurred in 1223, in late spring. The Mongols, having taken advantageous positions, waited until the Russian army, exhausted from the long pursuit and experiencing shortages of provisions, found itself in a vulnerable position. The first days of the battle did not yield a decisive advantage for either side. The Russian warriors, despite their fatigue, fought bravely. However, the Mongol tactics began to bear fruit. They used their renowned horse archers, who fired at the enemy from a distance and then quickly retreated, preventing them from engaging in close combat. The key moment was that the Mongols, skillfully feigning flight, forced some of the Russian troops, including Mstislav the Bold's retinue, to give chase. This resulted in the Russian army being stretched thin and losing its formation. At this point, the Mongols launched a counteroffensive. The Mongol cavalry, with its superior maneuverability, surrounded the scattered groups of Russian warriors. A brutal battle ensued. The Russian princes and their warriors fought to the last, but the odds were unequal. The Mongols, superbly trained and disciplined, acted in a coordinated and effective manner. The Battle of the Kalka River ended in the complete rout of the Russian army. Many princes were killed, many were taken prisoner. The losses were enormous. This defeat was a shock to the Russian lands, demonstrating how vulnerable they were to a well-organized and numerous army. The consequences of the Battle of Kalka were long-lasting. The Mongols, having completed their reconnaissance mission, did not immediately begin to conquer Russian lands. They continued their campaigns westward, but now they knew the strengths and weaknesses of their future adversaries. The Russian principalities, weakened and frightened, were unable to recover from this blow for a long time. It's important to note that in 1223, the Mongol army operating on the Kalka River was more of an advance guard than a main force. Genghis Khan was still alive, but the campaign itself was more of a reconnaissance mission. However, this campaign became a harbinger of the coming invasion that would change the course of Eastern European history. For ordinary people living at the time, such events were distant, but their impact was felt. Trade routes could be disrupted, new taxes were levied to support the army, and rumors of unseen conquerors spread by word of mouth, breeding fear and uncertainty. Life in the principalities continued as usual. Peasants tilled the land, artisans toiled in the cities, and princes waged their internecine wars. But somewhere in the east, in the steppes, a power was growing that would soon change this familiar way of life. After the Battle of Khalkha, the Mongols continued their journey. They routed the Cumans and then moved on, exploring the lands of the northern Caucasus, passing through the territories of modern-day Georgia and Armenia, and even reaching the shores of the Caspian Sea. Their route traversed a diverse range of landscapes, from endless steppes to mountain passes. They demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to diverse conditions and overcome any obstacle. This campaign to the west, although not a full-scale conquest, was of enormous significance. It demonstrated the Mongol military might, their strategic genius, and their ability to operate over vast distances. It also paved the way for future, larger-scale invasions that would profoundly impact the fate of many peoples. The Russian principalities, confronted by this force, learned a bitter but important lesson that would be remembered for years to come. After the great Genghis Khan passed away, the empire he had built found itself at a crossroads. It was a vast state, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, and governing it alone was no longer feasible. Therefore, in accordance with his will, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons. This division was not an act of weakening, but rather a deliberate move designed to preserve unity and ensure further development. Genghis Khan's main heirs were his sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui. Each received his share of the vast empire. The eldest son, Jochi, received lands in the western part of the empire, including the Urals and lands north of the Caspian Sea. His descendants, in particular his son Batu, later formed the Golden Horde. His second son, Chagatai, inherited lands in Central Asia, including what is now Uzbekistan and parts of Kazakhstan. This became the foundation of the Chagatai Ulus, which maintained its distinctive identity for centuries. The third son, Ogedei, was elected Great Khan after the death of Genghis Khan. He inherited lands in the heart of the empire, including Mongolia and northern China. It was under Ogedei that the imperial capital was moved to Karakoram, which became the center of government and an important trading center. The youngest son, Tolui, although he did not receive direct possessions, inherited most of the army and lands located immediately around Mongolia. His descendants, including Kublai, played a key role in the further expansion of the empire and the governance of China. This division created the basis for 4 great uluses, which, although part of a single empire, developed relatively independently. This allowed each region to adapt to local conditions and continue its conquests. Thus, Genghis Khan's descendants, following his legacy, continued their expansion. In the east, his grandson, Kublai Khan, in the mid-13th century, began the final conquest of China. He overthrew the southern Song dynasty, which had resisted Mongol rule for decades. The conquest of southern China was long and arduous, but ultimately led to the unification of all of China under Mongol rule. Kublai founded the new Yuan dynasty, which ruled China for over 100 years. In the West, Batu's grandson, Jochi's son, continued his grandfather's work. In the mid-13th century, he led a massive campaign against Europe. His army passed through the Russian principalities, already weakened by previous invasions. The Mongols then invaded Poland and Hungary, inflicting crushing defeats on the local armies. These campaigns, although devastating for Europe, demonstrated the Mongol military might and their ability to operate over vast distances. At the same time, other descendants of Genghis Khan were expanding their holdings in Persia and the Middle East. In the mid-13th century, Hulagu, brother of the great Khan Mengu, led a campaign into the Middle East. He destroyed the powerful Abbasid Caliphate, capturing Baghdad in 1258. This event marked the end of an era in the Islamic world. The Ilkhanate, a state that became an important center of culture and scholarship, was established in the conquered lands. Thus, Genghis Khan's empire did not disintegrate, but rather transformed. It divided into several large states, which continued to develop and conquer new territories. This period was a time of active military action, but also a time of the formation of new cultural and political centers. The lives of ordinary people during this time varied greatly depending on the region. In conquered lands, such as Rus or China, life was subject to new orders. The Mongols generally did not interfere in everyday life, as long as the population paid tribute and obeyed the laws. Peasants continued to cultivate the land, and artisans toiled in their workshops. However, the tax burden could be very heavy, and the threat of new invasions or uprisings always hung in the air. In the empire's central lands, such as Mongolia, life continued to follow the traditional nomadic way of life. Shepherds drove their flocks across the vast steppes, and warriors trained and prepared for new campaigns. Karakoram, the capital, was a bustling hub where representatives of various nations, traders, and ambassadors met. In new uluses, such as the Golden Horde or the Ilkhanate, Mongol nobility gradually adapted to local customs and religions. For example, in the Golden Horde, rulers eventually adopted Islam, while in the Ilkhanate, Islam became the dominant religion. This led to gradual assimilation and the formation of unique cultural blends. During this period, despite wars and conquests, the foundations for future trade and cultural ties were also laid. The Mongol uluses, as part of a single, larger empire, facilitated the development of trade routes, including the Great Silk Road. This opened up new opportunities for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. Thus, the period following Genghis Khan's death was a time not only of new conquests, but also of the complex process of forming new states and cultures. The great Khan's successors, following his spirit, continued to expand the empire's borders. But at the same time, each ulus found its own unique destiny, laying the foundation for the further development of world history. During this period, when Genghis Khan's empire reached its zenith, it was divided into several large uluses, regions, each developing along its own path, but remaining part of a single, albeit vast, whole. These uluses, ruled by the descendants of the great conqueror, became centers of power and influence, forming new state entities that left their mark on history. One of the most significant uluses, states, was the Golden Horde. Its founder is considered to be Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who, after successful campaigns in the West, including Russian lands and Europe, gained control of vast territories in the northwest of the Mongol Empire. Around the mid-13th century, around 1240, the city of Sarai Batu, located on the Volga River, became the capital of this ulus. The Golden Horde stretched from the Irtysh River in the east to the Danube in the west, encompassing the lands of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and parts of other countries. Life in the Golden Horde was diverse. The Mongol nobility, initially adhering to their traditions, gradually absorbed elements of local cultures. Many Mongol rulers and their retinues converted to Islam, which had a profound impact on the religious and cultural life of the ulus. In cities such as Sarai Batu, trade and crafts developed, and mosques and palaces were built. However, the bulk of the population, especially in the steppe regions, continued to lead a nomadic lifestyle, raising livestock. Government was exercised through a complex system of governors and tax collectors. Despite outward unity, internal conflicts and power struggles between various branches of the ruling family were not uncommon. Another important ulus was the Chagatai ulus, named after Genghis Khan's second son, Chagatai. This ulus encompassed lands across Central Asia, including modern-day Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and parts of Kazakhstan and Afghanistan. Its capital was the city of Al-Malik, followed by other centers such as Samarkand and Bukhara, both ancient and sophisticated cities. The Chagatai ulus was distinguished by its commitment to preserving Mongol traditions and laws. Its rulers often faced the need to suppress rebellions and maintain order across vast territories. A process of cultural synthesis also took place in this ulus, but it was less pronounced than in the Golden Horde, at least in its early stages. Trade along the Silk Road played a key role here, ensuring the prosperity of cities and the development of crafts. The Ilkhanate, or Ilegu Empire, was founded by Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, who captured Baghdad in the mid-13th century, around 1258, putting an end to the Abbasid Caliphate. The Ilkhanate encompassed Persia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Transcaucasia, including modern-day Iran, Iraq, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and part of Turkey. The capital of the Ilkhanate was Tabriz. The rulers of this ulus, as in the Golden Horde, gradually converted to Islam, which facilitated the integration of the Mongol elite into local Muslim society. The Ilkhanate became a center for the development of science, art, and literature. Many outstanding scholars and poets were under the patronage of the Ilkhans. During this period, the irrigation system was actively developed, and cities and palaces were built. However, the Ilkhanate also experienced internal difficulties, including dynastic strife and conflicts with neighboring states, particularly the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. These three uluses, the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Ulus, and the Ilkhanate, were powerful state entities that, despite their relative independence, remained bound by a common heritage and cultural influences. They were not simply conquerors, but also creators of new political and cultural realities. Life in these uluses, although varied across regions, was characterized by a complex interplay of Mongol traditions and local customs. Trade and crafts flourished in the cities, while traditional ways of life remained in the countryside. These uluses, as part of a vast empire, fostered stronger ties between East and West, leading to the flourishing of the Silk Road and unprecedented cultural exchange. During this period, when the Mongol Empire reached its territorial apogee, these uluses became the main centers of its power and influence, laying the foundations for the subsequent development of world history. After the Mongols had established their rule over much of Asia, their sights turned to the rich lands of southern China. These lands, ruled by the Song dynasty, represented a completely different world from the steppes from which the Mongols had come. Southern China was a land of farmers, developed cities, refined culture, and advanced technology. The Song dynasty, founded in 1960, was divided into two parts. The northern Song, which fell to the Jurchens in 1127, and the southern Song, which continued to exist in the south. It was the southern Song that the Mongol conquerors would face. The first clashes between the Mongols and the Song Empire occurred during Genghis Khan's lifetime. However, a full-scale invasion began later, when Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, took command of the Mongol forces. Kublai Khan, an ambitious and far-sighted ruler, sought to complete his grandfather's work and unite all of China under Mongol rule. The campaign against the southern Song was long and arduous. It began in the mid-13th century and lasted for several decades. The Mongols encountered strong resistance, a well-organized army and navy, and powerful fortified cities. Unlike their northern neighbors, the Song dynasty possessed advanced metallurgy, allowing them to produce high-quality weapons, including gunpowder weapons. They also used primitive flamethrowers and rockets, posing a new challenge for the Mongol warriors. One of the key moments in the conquest was the fall of Shangyang in 1273. Situated on the strategically important Han River, the city was defended for over 5 years. Its fall opened the way for the Mongols to the heart of the Song Empire. The Mongol army, led by experienced commanders such as Bayan, utilized its best qualities: discipline, mobility, and decisiveness. They also actively employed siege engines and siege tactics, adopting the experience of the conquered peoples. The Chinese Navy played a key role in this campaign. The Song Empire was renowned for its seafaring and warships. The Mongols, lacking a sophisticated navy of their own, utilized Chinese engineers and sailors, and built their own ships to challenge the Song's naval dominance. In 1275, the Mongol fleet, numbering thousands of vessels, launched a decisive offensive. The Battle of Yanzhou, fought in 1275, was one of the largest naval battles of the Middle Ages. The Mongols, using their numbers and innovative tactics, defeated the Song fleet. This opened the way to the imperial capital, Linnan, which they captured in 1276. The fall of the capital did not mean the complete end of resistance. The remnants of the Song army and court attempted to organize a defense in the southern provinces. However, by 1279, after the decisive Battle of Yamen, where the last Song navy was routed, the empire finally ceased to exist. The conquest of southern China was more than just a military success. It had enormous consequences for the entire region. The Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, founded a new dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. Kublai declared himself emperor in 1271, long before the final fall of the Song dynasty, thereby emphasizing his claim to all of China. Under the Yuan dynasty, China was unified for the first time in centuries. The Mongols, while maintaining their own cultural identity, actively absorbed Chinese traditions and administrative practices. Kublai, unlike many of his conquering predecessors, sought integration rather than mere domination. He adopted many elements of Chinese bureaucracy, the educational system, and even the Chinese written language. Everyday life in China underwent changes under Mongol rule. Mongol nobility occupied the highest positions, but a significant portion of the administrative apparatus remained Chinese. A census was conducted, and new tax systems were introduced. The Mongols promoted trade, strengthening the Silk Road and other trade routes. They also patronized the arts and sciences, albeit in a somewhat different direction than previous dynasties. The construction of the new capital, Khanbaliq, modern-day Beijing, became a symbol of the new era. The city was planned on a grand scale, with majestic palaces and temples reflecting the might of the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan sought to create a unified space where diverse cultures and peoples could coexist. However, Mongol rule was not without its challenges. There were periods of discontent among the local population, uprisings, and internal conflicts. The Mongol elite, being relatively small, often felt isolated from Chinese society. Despite this, the Yuan dynasty left a significant mark on Chinese history, uniting the country and fostering its further development. It was a time when East and West became even more closely connected, opening new horizons for knowledge and exchange. And so, when the Mongol Empire had extended its dominion from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, the time had come to turn its gaze to the Western lands. After the triumphant conquest of Central Asia and Persia, a mighty army, led by the grandsons of Genghis Khan, moved on. The main striking force of this Western campaign was Batu Khan, later called Batu Khan, the son of Jochi, the eldest son of the great conqueror. His generals were experienced commanders, such as Sube'etei, whose military wisdom had proven its effectiveness time and again. In 1236, Mongol troops entered the lands of Rus. This wasn't the first clash, but this was a full-scale invasion. Cities and principalities, disunited and unprepared for such an onslaught, fell one after another. Ryazan, Kolomna, Moscow, Vladimir, all these ancient centers of the Russian land were destroyed. Mongol tactics were relentless. Swift cavalry attacks, the use of siege engines adopted from conquered peoples, and the fearlessness of warriors accustomed to harsh conditions. The siege of Kiev, one of the most significant cities of Rus, lasted several months. The city's residents put up a courageous defense, but the forces were unequal. In 1240, Kiev fell, leaving behind only ruins. The consequences of this invasion were profound. For many years, the Russian lands fell under the rule of the Golden Horde, which became one of the largest fragments of the once unified empire. This period is known as the Mongol Yoke, a period that had a profound impact on the subsequent development of the Russian state, its culture, and its political structure. But Mongol expansion did not stop with Rus. As early as 1241, an army under Batu and Subutai invaded Poland. European knights, accustomed to their own methods of warfare, proved unprepared for the swift and merciless attacks of the Mongol cavalry. The Battle of Legnica, fought in April 1241, became one of the most striking examples of this clash. The Polish and German forces, despite their numerical superiority, were routed. The Mongols demonstrated their tactical genius, trapping and destroying their enemy. Immediately after their victory in Poland, the Mongol army turned south toward Hungary. The Kingdom of Hungary, one of the most powerful in Central Europe, prepared for defense. King Bela IV rallied his forces, but even they were unable to withstand the Mongol onslaught. In December 1241, the Battle of the Sajo River took place. This battle became one of the most crushing defeats for Christian armies of that time. The Mongols, using their famous maneuvers, encircled and destroyed the Hungarian army. Hungary, like the Russian lands, suffered a devastating invasion. Cities were razed, the population dispersed. The Mongol army swept across the country, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. However, unlike in Rus, the Mongols did not remain in Hungary for long. In 1242, after receiving news of the death of the great Khan Ogedei, Batu Khan decided to withdraw his troops. This decision is believed to have saved Europe from further Mongol invasion. The events of 1241 to 1242 had a profound impact on all of Europe. They demonstrated the vulnerability of European kingdoms to a new, unknown military force. Fear of the Mongols gripped many countries. Many historians believe that these campaigns were one of the factors that contributed to the further development of European states, prompting them to greater centralization and strengthen their defenses. Despite the devastation wrought by the Mongol campaigns, it's worth noting that the Mongols were more than conquerors. After establishing their rule, they often sought to restore order and ensure security in the conquered territories. While life under Mongol rule was difficult, it also brought certain changes. The Mongols fostered trade by securing trade routes, which in turn facilitated cultural exchange. Thus, the Mongol conquests in Europe, although marked by brutality and destruction, became a significant milestone in the continent's history. They opened up new, albeit terrifying, horizons, forcing European nations to reconsider their understanding of the world and their place in it. These events, which took place in the mid-13th century, became part of a broader picture of Mongol expansion that forever changed the map of the world. Continuing our journey through history, we come to one of the most astonishing aspects of the Mongol conquests, the period known as Pax Mongolica. This is the time when the vast empire, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, became the guarantor of peace and security across its vast expanses. While we've already discussed conquests, it's important to understand that after establishing power, The Mongols sought not only control, but also development of the territories they ruled. It was during this period that the Great Silk Road, an ancient artery connecting East and West, experienced a rebirth. Before the Mongol conquests, trade routes were often unsafe, subject to attacks by bandits and the arbitrary exercise of local rulers. The Mongols, however, having united vast territories under their rule, were able to provide an unprecedented level of security for travelers and merchants. This was achieved through the creation of an effective security system, including post stations known as yam, located approximately 30 miles apart. These stations provided travelers with rest areas, a change of horses, and provisions, significantly speeding and facilitating travel. Trade flourished. Goods once considered rare and exotic became available in the most remote corners of the empire. Silk, porcelain, spices, and tea were shipped from China to Europe. Furs, leather, precious metals, and various handicrafts traveled in the opposite direction. Merchants like the famous Venetian traveler Marco Polo, whose writings have survived, undertook long and sometimes dangerous, but now much more predictable voyages. Marco Polo spent over 17 years in the service of the great Khan Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, beginning around 1271. He described the richness and diversity of goods he saw in Persia, Central Asia, and China, testifying to the scale of trade relations. Diplomacy also received a new impetus. The Mongol Empire became a unique hub where the interests of many states and peoples intersected. Ambassadors and emissaries traveled freely throughout the empire, establishing contacts and maintaining relations between various parts of the world. Mongol rulers, especially the great Khan Kublai Khan, showed an interest in various cultures and religions. They invited scholars, artisans, artists, and doctors from various countries to their court, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and ideas. Cultural exchange became one of the most significant consequences of the Pax Mongolica. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles began to spread at an unprecedented rate. For example, papermaking and printing technologies, which originated in China, gradually penetrated the West. Architectural styles, musical instruments, and culinary traditions were all enriched by the interaction of different cultures. The influence of Mongol art, for example, can be seen in Persian miniatures and in decorative elements used in Europe. It's important to note that the Mongol administration, despite its military might, was quite pragmatic. They understood that the empire's prosperity depended on the well-being of its subjects, including merchants. Therefore, laws were created to protect trade caravans and establish fair trade rules. While taxes certainly existed, they were often structured and predictable, a contrast to the chaotic and burdensome tax collection that could occur in fragmented states. This period of peace and prosperity, though built on the strength of arms, allowed peoples separated by thousands of miles to get to know each other better. The Silk Road became not just a conduit for goods, but also a channel for the transfer of knowledge, beliefs, and cultural values. It was a unique moment in history, when a vast territory was united under a single authority, creating the conditions for unprecedented interaction between civilizations. Although the Mongol Empire ultimately disintegrated, the legacy of Pax Mongolica remained. It demonstrated the importance of connections between different parts of the world, and how trade and cultural exchange could foster development and prosperity. This period served as a bridge between the medieval West and the East, setting the stage for further global changes. Now that we have looked at this amazing period of peace and prosperity, we can move on to the next important aspect, the system of government that the Mongols created to maintain their vast empire. Having delved into the remarkable period of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Mongolica and examined how the Silk Road became an artery connecting civilizations, we can move on to the next important aspect, the system of governance the Mongols created to maintain their vast empire. This system, although reliant on military might, was remarkably pragmatic and effective, leaving a significant mark on the history of state building. When discussing the Mongol system of governance, it's important to understand that it wasn't uniform and evolved over decades, adapting to different regions and cultures. However, there were common principles that permeated the entire empire. One key element was the centralization of power, while still preserving a certain degree of autonomy for conquered peoples. The Mongols generally didn't seek to completely destroy existing administrative structures. Instead, they often integrated them into their system, appointing loyalists to key positions or allowing local rulers to remain in power under Mongol control. The foundation of governance was a strict hierarchy. At the very top stood the Great Khan, whose power was considered absolute. Below him were his sons and grandsons, who governed large sections of the empire, known as uluses. These uluses, in turn, were divided into smaller administrative units. It is important to note that the Mongol administration was quite flexible. They understood that to effectively govern such a vast territory, they needed to rely on the knowledge and experience of local residents. Therefore, representatives of various nationalities were often brought in. Chinese, Persians, Russians, and Turks all played a role in the administrative apparatus. Particular attention was paid to tax collection. The Mongols introduced a structured tax system, which was more predictable than the chaotic tax collection typical of many fragmented states of the time. There were several types of taxes: land tax, livestock tax, and a tax on artisans and merchants. In addition, there was a system of duties, such as the obligation to provide horses and guides for state needs, as well as to participate in the construction of roads and bridges. These duties, although burdensome, contributed to the maintenance of the empire's infrastructure, which in turn facilitated trade and travel. To ensure law and order and justice, the Mongols relied on their code of laws, known as the Yasa. Although the exact text of the Yasa has not survived, it is known that it covered a wide range of issues, from rules of conduct on the battlefield and in everyday life to inheritance and punishments for crimes. The Yasa was aimed at maintaining discipline and order, as well as protecting the property and lives of subjects. Particular attention was paid to the protection of travelers and merchants, which was vital to the prosperity of the empire. Violations of laws, especially those concerning road safety, were severely punished. The postal service, or YAM system, played a vital role in the Mongol system of governance. It was a network of stations located at regular intervals throughout the empire. Each station was equipped with horses, fodder, and personnel responsible for transmitting messages and couriers. This system allowed for the rapid delivery of orders, news, and information from one end of the empire to the other. Thanks to the YAM system, rulers could quickly respond to events, command their troops, and maintain contact with their viceroys. This was a truly revolutionary achievement for its time, significantly speeding up administrative and communication processes. In the daily lives of people during the Mongol conquests, the system of governance exerted a dual influence. On the one hand, the establishment of a unified order and the protection of trade routes brought stability and opportunities for development. Merchants could travel long distances, artisans had access to new markets, and farmers could sell their surplus produce. On the other hand, the need to pay taxes and fulfill duties was a constant burden. However, compared to the constant wars and lawlessness that could reign in fragmented lands, Mongol order was often perceived as a blessing. The Mongols also demonstrated remarkable tolerance towards various religions. They did not impose their faith and allowed peoples to practice their own customs and beliefs. This helped ease tensions and facilitated the governance of a multi-ethnic and multi-religious empire. At the same time, the Mongols themselves, especially in later periods, gradually adopted the culture and religion of the conquered peoples, leading to further assimilation and transformation. The system of governance created by the Mongols was complex and multifaceted. It combined centralized authority with elements of decentralization, supported by strict laws and an efficient infrastructure. Although their conquests were fraught with violence, the very principle of governance they established contributed to the stabilization and development of vast territories. This pragmatic approach to administration, along with the development of trade and communication, laid the foundations for future global changes, leaving an indelible mark on history. Now that we have examined how the Mongols governed their empire, we can move on to the next important stage, the period of decline and disintegration that inevitably befell this grandiose entity. Over time, even the most powerful empires face trials that test their resilience. The Mongol Empire, one of the largest in history, was no exception. After a period of explosive growth and unprecedented conquests, a natural stage ensued when internal forces began to weaken its cohesion, and external circumstances required constant adaptation. This period of decline and disintegration was not a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual process, driven by a multitude of factors that gradually altered the face of the once monolithic state. One of the first and perhaps most significant reasons for the empire's weakening was the lack of a single strong successor after the death of Genghis Khan. Although his sons and grandsons wielded enormous power and ambition, they also had their own interests and territories they sought to strengthen. After the death of the great Khan Ögedei in 1051, a period of interregnums and rivalries between the various branches of the dynasty followed. Decisions regarding the succession were made at kurultais, or assemblies of nobles, but these processes were often fraught with intrigue and struggles for influence. As a result, despite the formal recognition of the Great Khan, real power gradually shifted to the rulers of individual uluses, regions. These uluses, formed to govern vast territories, gradually acquired increasing independence. The Golden Horde in the west ruled by the descendants of Jochi. The Chagatai Ulus in Central Asia, inherited by Chagatai's son, and the Ilkhanate in the Middle East, founded by Hulagu, the grandson of Genghis Khan, all developed along their own paths. Even the Great Khan, whose headquarters were in Karakoram and later in Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, was not always able to effectively control remote regions. The Ulus rulers, being local, were more familiar with the specifics of their domains, had their own armies, and developed their own administrative structures. Over time, the differences between the uluses became increasingly noticeable. In the Golden Horde, for example, rulers like Batu Khan and later his descendants gradually adopted local customs and even religion. Islam began to spread, becoming the dominant faith in the uluses. This, in turn, distinguished them from other Mongol domains, where traditional beliefs persisted or Christianity spread, as in the Ilkhanate. Differences in culture, religion, and political interests made it increasingly difficult to maintain the unity of the empire. Another factor contributing to the collapse was the removal of the center of power from traditional Mongol lands. After the conquest of northern China and the founding of the Yuan dynasty, the imperial capital moved to Khanbalik. For the Mongols, accustomed to a nomadic lifestyle on the steppes, life in a large, sedentary city was unfamiliar. This led to the ruling elite gradually breaking away from their roots and adopting Chinese administrative traditions. While this facilitated more effective governance in China, it also risked weakening ties with other parts of the empire, which were located far from the new center. In addition to internal factors, external circumstances also contributed to the empire's decline. Conquered peoples, although subservient to Mongol rule, were not always completely loyal. Rebellions periodically broke out, requiring significant military efforts to suppress. For example, in China, despite the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, resistance from the Chinese population continued. In the mid-14th century, in 1368, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown by a rebellion led by Zhu Yuanzhang, who founded the Ming dynasty. This event became one of the most striking examples of the Mongol loss of control over a large territory. Similar processes were occurring in other parts of the empire. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Ulus eventually disintegrated into smaller fiefdoms. In the Ilkhanate, despite a flourishing of culture and scholarship, the dynasty founded by Hulagu collapsed in the early 14th century, ushering in a period of turmoil and fragmentation. Even the Golden Horde, which had lasted longer than others, gradually began to lose its power. Internal strife, power struggles between various khans, and weakening control over outlying territories led to its gradual decline. Logistics also played a significant role in the empire's weakening. Maintaining control over such a vast territory required enormous resources and an effective communication system. Although the Mongols developed an excellent postal service, the Yam system, that allowed for the rapid transmission of messages, governing remote regions remained a complex task. The need for a constant troop presence, tax collection, and maintaining order across vast distances strained the empire's resources. Economic factors also played a role. While the Mongol Empire fostered trade, it also required significant economic investment to support the army and administrative apparatus. Taxes, while not prohibitively high compared to some other states, nevertheless placed a burden on the population. Furthermore, in some regions, particularly those where Mongol rule had been established relatively recently, the economy could suffer from the consequences of conquest and the need for restructuring. Gradually, as central authority weakened, individual uluses began to develop as independent states. The Mongol identity that had united the conquerors began to erode under the influence of local cultures. The rulers of the Mongol dynasties living among the conquered peoples adopted their languages, customs, and religions. This led to Genghis Khan's descendants becoming increasingly local in their domains, losing touch with their shared Mongol heritage. As a result of these processes, the vast Mongol Empire, which once stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, gradually disintegrated into a number of smaller states. These states, although retaining some features of the Mongol heritage, were no longer a unified entity. Their histories developed independently, and they continued to interact with each other as distinct political entities. This disintegration did not represent the complete disappearance of Mongol influence, but it marked the end of the era of a unified Mongol power that had so profoundly influenced the course of world history. Thus, the decline and collapse of the Mongol Empire was a multifactorial process. It included the absence of a strong, unified leader after Genghis Khan, the growing independence of individual uluses, regions, cultural and religious differences, as well as external challenges and internal rebellions. The gradual weakening of central authority and the rise of regional centers led to the transformation of the once unified empire into a mosaic of independent states, each pursuing its own historical path. This period marked the natural end of an era of grandiose conquests, but it did not signify the complete disappearance of the Mongol heritage, which continued to live on in the culture, politics, and peoples of the lands once dominated by Genghis Khan's descendants. The Mongolian legacy is not simply the legacy of its grand conquests, but also a profound, multifaceted influence that is still felt today. It has manifested itself in a wide variety of spheres of life, shaping the character of many peoples and states. Imagine a vast mosaic, each fragment of which, as part of the whole, has acquired its own unique characteristics. Similarly, the Mongol Empire, after its disintegration, left behind many such fragments, each of which continued to live and develop, carrying within itself a piece of its great past. One of the most notable aspects of this legacy was the dissemination of ideas and technologies. The Mongols, as skilled intermediaries, connected east and west. The Great Silk Road, which experienced a new heyday, passed through their territory. Trade caravans, carrying not only goods but also knowledge, ideas, and crafts, moved freely between Europe and Asia. This facilitated the exchange of cultural achievements. For example, technologies such as papermaking, gunpowder, and printing, which originated in China, became known to the West thanks to the Mongols. In turn, European achievements such as cartography and certain types of weaponry penetrated the East. The administrative system created by the Mongols also had a significant impact. Although the empire disintegrated, many of its administrative methods were adopted by local rulers. The Mongols introduced standardized tax systems and developed a postal service known as the yam, which allowed for the rapid transmission of information and messages over vast distances. This system was so effective that elements of it persisted in many regions even after the fall of Mongol rule. For example, post stations established by the Mongols became the basis for the development of transportation infrastructure in the Golden Horde and other states. The legal system based on the Yasa, the code of laws of Genghis Khan, also left its mark. Although the Yasa in its original form has not survived, its principles, justice, order, and respect for the law influenced the development of legal systems in the Ulises. Mongol law strove for unification and fairness, which was especially important for a vast and diverse empire. Even after its collapse, elements of Mongol justice could be adapted and used by local rulers. The cultural influence of the Mongols was no less significant. Although the Mongols themselves largely assimilated into the local population, they brought their traditions and customs. In regions where Mongol rule lasted for a long time, such as Persia and China, a mutual enrichment of cultures was observed. Mongol nobles, by adopting Islam or Buddhism, contributed to the spread of these religions. They also patronized the arts and sciences, inviting scholars, poets, and artists to their courts. The impact on demography and migration was also significant. The conquests of Genghis Khan and his successors led to massive population movements. Cities were destroyed and people were displaced, changing the ethnic and cultural landscape of many regions. However, it is worth noting that the Mongols often attracted artisans and specialists from the conquered lands, facilitating their settlement and development in new territories. The geopolitical impact of the Mongol conquests was colossal. The fall of powerful states such as the Khwarezm-Shahs and the Jin Empire reshaped the world map. The emergence of new states such as the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Ulis, and the Ilkhanate shaped new political realities. These states, although heirs to a unified empire, developed along distinct paths, entering into complex relationships with each other and with neighboring powers. Let's take a closer look at how exactly the Mongolian heritage has manifested itself in different parts of the world. In China, after nearly a century of Mongol rule during the Yuan dynasty, Chinese culture did not disappear. On the contrary, it was enriched. The Mongols, while maintaining their own identity, actively interacted with Chinese civilization. They adopted the Chinese system of governance, developed trade, and promoted the construction of canals and roads. Chinese technology and art received a new impetus. After the expulsion of the Mongols and the establishment of the Ming dynasty, many achievements of the Yuan era were preserved and developed. For example, Chinese ceramics, renowned for its exquisite craftsmanship, flourished under the Mongols, and these traditions continued. In Central Asia, in the territory of the former Chagatai Ulus, the Mongol nobility gradually merged with the local Turkic population. However, the Mongol heritage remained in language, customs, and political traditions. The formation of states such as the Timurid Empire was largely linked to Mongol traditions of state building. Timur, although not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, adopted Mongol symbols of power and sought to restore the empire's grandeur. In the Middle East, in the Ilkhan state, the Mongol nobility adopted Islam and actively promoted the development of science and art. Many historians and scholars of the time note the flourishing of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine at the courts of the Ilkhans. For example, the observatory in Moraga, founded by Nasir ad-Din Tusi, became one of the leading scientific centers of its time. The Mongols contributed to the preservation and development of Arabic and Persian culture, and also brought new ideas and technologies from China. In Eastern Europe, the Golden Horde, one of the largest remnants of the empire, had a profound impact on the development of the Russian principalities. The period of dependence on the horde, known as the Mongol yoke, lasted over 2 centuries, from approximately 1240 to 1480. This period was difficult for the Russian lands, but it also contributed to the centralization of power in Moscow, which gradually became the center of resistance and unification of the Russian lands. The Mongols contributed to military affairs, administrative organization, and the tax system. Many words related to governance, finance, and clothing came into the Russian language from the Turkic languages that were spoken in the horde. Interestingly, Mongol rule, despite its aggressive nature, contributed to the development of a unified Russian state. The Moscow princes, having received the charter of reign from the Khans of the Golden Horde, gradually consolidated their power by collecting tribute and suppressing rebellions from other principalities. Paradoxically, this led to the strengthening of the central government, which was eventually able to throw off the horde's yoke. In Europe, the Mongol invasion, although it did not lead to the establishment of permanent rule, left its mark. Fear of the Mongols, their military tactics, and the organization of their armies all influenced European rulers and generals. Some historians believe that the Mongols indirectly contributed to the development of European states, forcing them to seek new forms of defense and organization. It's important to note that the Mongol legacy is not all positive. The conquests were accompanied by destruction, loss of life, and the loss of cultural treasures. However, history knows no purely positive or negative phenomena. The Mongol conquests, as a catalyst for change, set in motion processes that, in the long term, altered the course of world history. Let's consider some details that illustrate this influence. For example, in the field of cartography, the Mongols, traveling across vast territories, collected information about geography, rivers, and mountains. This information, collected and systematized, contributed to the creation of more accurate maps. Thanks to the Mongol world, European explorers like Marco Polo were able to explore Asia and bring home valuable information. In the field of communications, as already mentioned, the Yam system was revolutionary for its time. It allowed messages to be transmitted at a speed previously unheard of. This was important not only for the administration of the empire, but also for the development of trade and diplomacy. Imagine if a message from Beijing to Europe could be delivered in a matter of weeks rather than months or years. Cultural exchange also manifested itself in art. Mongolian ornaments, patterns, and motifs became part of the decorative arts of Persia, India, and China. New subjects related to Mongolian life, hunting, and military campaigns emerged in painting. Even in the field of medicine, traces of Mongolian influence can be found. The Mongols, being nomads, had their own knowledge of herbs and healing practices. This knowledge, mingling with the medical traditions of other peoples, contributed to the development of medicine. It's important to understand that the Mongol legacy is not a static picture, but a dynamic process. The Mongols' influence was not one-sided. They themselves absorbed the culture and traditions of the peoples they conquered, adapting to local conditions. This resulted in each state that emerged from the ruins of the empire acquiring its own unique characteristics. For example, in the Golden Horde, where the Mongol nobility quickly adopted the Turkic language and Islam, a unique culture emerged, combining Mongol, Turkic, and Arabic elements. This state played an important role in the history of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. During the Ilkhanate, the adoption of Islam by the Mongol nobility led to a flourishing of Persian culture and science. The Ilkhans patronized scholars, poets, and artists, which contributed to the creation of outstanding works of art and scientific works. In the Chagatai Ulus, where the Mongol nobility merged with the Turkic population, a unique culture developed that influenced subsequent Central Asian states. Even in distant Europe, the Mongol influence, albeit indirect, was felt. Fear of the Mongols and their military might forced European states to seek new paths of development. Perhaps it was precisely these challenges that contributed to the development of nation-states in Europe. Thus, the legacy of the Mongol conquests is not simply a story of destruction and war. It is a story of global interaction, of cultural exchange, of the formation of new political and social realities. The Mongols, without realizing it, became a powerful catalyst for change that reshaped the world and laid the foundations for many modern processes. Their empire, though short-lived, left an indelible mark on human history, demonstrating how closely interconnected different peoples and cultures are, and how a single event can trigger a chain reaction that transforms entire continents. This legacy lives on in the languages, customs, political systems, and cultural traditions of many peoples, a reminder of the fragility and yet remarkable nature of human history. The empire born from the steppes was not just a period of conquest, but also a powerful catalyst that changed the course of history. The path from humble origins to the creation of the greatest land empire was filled with events forever etched in the annals of human history. We have seen how Genghis Khan, by uniting disparate tribes, laid the foundation for future achievements. His law, the Yasa, became the basis for organizing the army and governing vast territories. This power, discipline, and commitment to order enabled the Mongols to cross continents, connecting east and west. Conquests that initially seemed devastating ultimately led to unexpected consequences. The fall of the Khwarezm Empire, the conquest of northern China, the campaigns to the west, including the Battle of the Khalkha River and the invasion of the Russian principalities, all were part of a grand process. But behind these military successes lay not only force, but also organizational ability. Genghis Khan's successors, having divided the empire, continued expansion, establishing such states as the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Ulus, and the Ilkhanate. In these new formations, the Mongol nobility, interacting with local cultures, contributed to their development. In the Ilkhanate, where the Mongol nobility adopted Islam, Persian culture and science flourished. Scholars, poets, and artists found patronage, producing outstanding works. In the Chagatai Ulus, where the Mongol nobility merged with the Turkic population, a unique culture emerged that would influence the subsequent history of Central Asia. Even in distant Europe, where direct Mongol presence was limited, their influence was felt. Fear of Mongol power and their military organization spurred European states to seek new paths of development. Perhaps it was these very challenges that contributed to the formation of nation-states in Europe, spurring a search for internal strength and unity. Thus, the legacy of the Mongol conquests is not only a story of destruction and war. It is a story of profound and widespread interaction between peoples, of unprecedented cultural exchange that linked previously disparate worlds. It is a story of the formation of new political and social realities that determined the subsequent development of many civilizations. The Mongols, without realizing it, became a powerful catalyst for change that reshaped the medieval world. Their empire, though short-lived in its unity, left an indelible mark on human history. It demonstrated how closely interconnected different peoples and cultures are, and how a single event can spark a chain reaction that changes the face of entire continents. The Great Silk Road, revived by Mongol control, became an artery through which flowed not only goods, but also ideas, knowledge, and technology. Diplomatic ties established across vast expanses facilitated contacts between distant nations. The Mongol system of administration, taxation, and law, though adapted to local conditions, demonstrated a commitment to order and efficiency. This influence, spreading throughout the vast empire, left its mark. The decline and collapse of an empire, though inevitable, are also part of the historical process. The causes of fragmentation and loss of territorial control served as lessons for subsequent generations of rulers. But the most important legacy of Mongol rule was an awareness of the interconnectedness of the world. The Mongols, having united vast territories under their banner, contributed to the world becoming more open and accessible. This was a period when borders became less impenetrable and cultural barriers more permeable. This is precisely the positive legacy of the Mongol era, creating conditions for global interaction, stimulating cultural exchange, and shaping new political and social realities. The Mongols swept through history like a powerful whirlwind, but after their departure, the world was never the same. They became the catalyst that accelerated processes, led to the flourishing of some civilizations and laid the foundations for the development of others. Studying this period, we see not just a chronology of battles and conquests, but also the deep, long-term processes that shaped our world. It is a reminder of how history intertwines the destinies of nations, how even the most devastating events can lead to unexpected positive consequences, and how closely all corners of our planet are interconnected. This legacy lives on in the languages, customs, political systems, and cultural traditions of many peoples. It reminds us of how fragile and yet wondrous human history is, and how important it is to understand the past to better navigate the present. Let this journey through the pages of Mongol history leave you with peace and the understanding that even in the most turbulent times, processes occur that lead to development and change. History, like a river, flows, changing banks but preserving its essence. And every era, even the most difficult, contributes to the overall picture of human existence. The world continues to move, and every event, no matter how distant it may seem, is part of this continuous flow. Immerse yourself in this peace, in this awareness of the grandeur of history that unites us all. May your sleep be deep and peaceful.